Good morning to you. Do you believe this action by Trump is the result of the work of your organization?
Well, AfriForum has built up a massive list and database of friends and allies all across the world, particularly in the United States. And as soon as the Expropriation Act was signed by the president, we all informed them about the facts here in South Africa. So I do hope that we had a massive effect there. I mean, you can't really see everything that happens behind the scenes, but I do think AfriForum had a massive impact.
Okay, so this money, $440 million in funding for PEPFAR for South Africans living with HIV, is this the consequence you wanted?
I don't think that's particularly what Trump is talking about here. He's cutting off aid to many countries. He's pretty much disabled U.S. aid in total. I think what he's talking about here is increasing punishment on South Africa, particularly regarding the Expropriation Act. And I mean, this has always been AfriForum's stance, that punish the politicians that push through these destructive policies, not the citizens of the country. That's always been AfriForum's stance. You can go check out all of our press statements on it. And I think what Trump is talking about here is future action rather than action that's already been taken.
I love the idea of punishing politicians and not necessarily the people of South Africa.
But that's not what he said, Ernest. He says he wants to have an investigation. That's fine. He said he's cutting it immediately. He said things are happening to people in South Africa, a certain class of people. I presume he's dog whistling there, in fact, to his supporters. You're playing a very dangerous game here. And isn't the consequence that we've lost $440 million for people living with HIV?
Stephen, you are playing a very dishonest game here by saying that that's the direct result of what AfriForum is doing. Our direct result is getting under the president's attention, the Expropriation Act. He was going to cut off aid to dozens of countries all across the world anyway. What he's talking about here is additional measures to combat particularly expropriation without compensation. The dangerous game is not AfriForum. The dangerous game is the South African government passing laws that directly attack private property rights in this country. And also the dangerous game is the South African government having 141 race laws on the books. Just 20 minutes ago, Elon Musk made a tweet responding to President Ramaphosa, asking him in his words, why does South Africa have openly racist laws? And Elon Musk is 100% on the money. That's the dangerous game.
I think that needs perspective, because the 142 laws that are racial laws that South Africa currently has, 52 of them were created after apartheid. So a vast majority of those are pre-apartheid laws. And actually, they've come down from 300 racial laws that were in practice before the apartheid regime ended.
And I'm very glad that the world is taking notice, finally.
Okay, but you said at the very beginning, that's why I asked the question, in case you did not think that this was the result of your work, that this is the result of your work. It would surely be foreseeable that this is what Trump would do. Yes, of course he is cutting aid to other countries. There was a waiver signed by Mark Rubio in terms of HIV treatment. That's a completely
separate policy. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
You're trying to conflate those two to create this moral panic around what's happening, to say that, look how evil you are. That's not true. What's happening is the South African government is threatening private property rights, and the US president is saying he won't stand for it. There's going to be additional measures, from what I can see, in regards to what Trump is announcing here.
The guy's right, actually. The 400 million that's being cut from South Africa, the PEPFAR 400 million, is actually not the same conversation that we're having today with Trump saying that he wants to pause further funding to South Africa. The 400 million comes with a much broader attempt of Trump to save money. They're looking at about $100 billion annually, and they're cutting off funding to about 200 countries. So that is actually not the same topic. The presenter's trying to be a little bit sneaky there. Either that, or the presenter doesn't necessarily understand that, that nuance.
Things going on here, right? One of them is that you have been to Washington, your organization. You're very proud of your influence in Washington, from what I can see. The second thing is that you have a US president now who talks about a class of people who are being treated very badly. Who do you believe he's talking about?
He's talking about the people in South Africa that are constantly attacked by the politicians for the color of their skin, the minorities that are constantly scapegoated for all the failures of the ANC. He's talking about the minorities that are targeted by the race laws on the books in this country. He's talking about those minorities targeted, for example, by policies or that you saw, for example, in Dis-Chem, where that internal memo leaked a few years ago, where the promotion and hiring of white people was completely barred by under threat from government fines. To try and ignore these realities is to push your head into the sand like an ostrich. They are there. There are people, especially minorities, being targeted in this country by legislation, and the government is open about it in their rhetoric.
You seem to be a little nervous about using the phrase white people. Why don't you just say it, Ernest? It's white people he's talking about in your view, right?
Because it's not just white people, it's many other minority groups in this country as well, in particular white people. That's why it would be dishonest to say just white people. There's nuance here, Stephen. I mean, that's the whole point, that's why AfriForum says we are bringing the facts to the table. We're not a political party. If there's nuance, we bring the nuance to the table. I mean, do you have a problem with that?
Not at all. I completely understand nuance, and of course we see it in the leadership of Africa.
I must say, bro, being a white person in South Africa is very tough. I can't imagine being a poor white person, not being a white person, because being a normal white person is probably the best thing you can be. But being a poor white person in South Africa is the worst thing ever, because you're going to go out there, look for a job, and they're not going to give you the position because they prefer black people because of affirmative action in BEE. So that's pretty tough. And also, if you're a white business person, you can't really do business with the state if you don't have a black partner. It's very complex. But being a poor white person in South Africa, not good at all. And I actually do sympathize with that a lot.
The point here is that you went to Washington, you say you're so worried about the Land Expropriation Act. I'm sure it's a bill that you've studied and many, many times. The fact is it talks about nil compensation in cases where land has been abandoned or is not being used productively. All of the experts I've spoken to who are neutral lawyers, they do not have a political agenda in any case, have all made the same point. As a result of the president's signing of the expropriation bill, now an act into law 2 weeks ago, virtually nothing is going to change. The US, in fact, Trump's government has the right to expropriate land in the public interest, and that's what this all talks about. Is it not the case that you've gone to the US and you've hyped everybody up, and this is the consequence?
No, that's a very disingenuous way of putting it. It's a very sneaky argument to put it even more bluntly. The issue is not expropriation with adequate compensation, as you see all across the world. The problem is the Expropriation Act enables expropriation without compensation. Now, you can play the little language game of euphemisms of nil and no compensation, but when your employer tells you, I'm going to pay you nil this year, or I'm going to pay you nil this month, I dare you to tell him that, oh, I'm so glad that it's not no salary that I'm going to be paid. Nil is a euphemism for no compensation. It just means that the government is going to do their little sums, and then they're going to say, well, we've factored in our agenda, and that means our sums say you deserve nil compensation for your property. That is expropriation without compensation by a different name. And if your legal experts are telling you that, then they are absolutely politically biased and not playing an honest game.
I'd like to say something with regards to that. I find it quite funny that America is bothered by our Land Expropriation Act, because they actually have a Land Expropriation Act of their own. They call it eminent domain. The key difference in these two acts is the fact that the American one actually allows for compensation, whereas the South African one doesn't always allow for compensation. Now, land expropriation in South Africa can still have compensation in certain situations. So these are situations, the ones that don't have compensations are situations where the land has been abandoned. The landowners have a lot of land and they're not using it. In South Africa, you find people with like 10,000 hectares and they only occupy like 1,000 or 2 hectares. That is ridiculous in my opinion. If you know how big a hectare is, you'd agree with me. I mean, imagine having 10,000 hectares and you only occupy 2,000 hectares, and you won't even give the government 1,000 hectares to do something for the locals. Tricky.
Ernest, after all of this time, 30 years into democracy, right? No farms, no land has been taken without compensation. The point of this act is particularly for cases where land has been abandoned. This happens. I mean, it happens around the world where no one can trace the owner's passed on, there are no descendants. I mean, you'll be aware that this has happened. The fact is that government needs to do something about all of that. What you're doing is conflating this with other issues, making it a big story. To put it bluntly, and let's talk about what we're talking about, this government is not coming for the land of white farmers, is it? You don't believe that?
Well, this is the same government that pushed to to enable expropriation without compensation through the amendment of the Constitution just a few years ago.
But
they showed their hand.
But it didn't vote in favour of it in the end, did it?
Oh,
the
wow.
ANC didn't.
So, I mean, I'm calling it attempted murder, and you're saying, well, they didn't succeed in murdering anyone. I mean, their intentions are clear. This is the government that said, after that failed in Parliament, ANC cadres went to the media and said, now that this opportunity has failed, we will use other avenues to get the same ends, such as the Expropriation Act.
Okay.
That is in the words of ANC representatives. Okay. So when it comes to what you're talking about here, should we only make noise after human rights have been violated, after the government has started expropriating without compensation farms? Or do you actually warn people that the government has granted themselves the power to do that? You act preventatively. You do not wait until human rights violations and atrocities have happened to say anything about them.
I still say it's tricky, man. A lot of farmers in South Africa have vast amounts of land that they're not using, very big amounts of land that they're not using, really. 10,000 hectares, and someone using like 1,000, 2,000, even if they're using 5,000 hectares, bro, can they not at least donate 1,000 hectares to the government to say that take 1,000 hectares, and as long as it's gonna go within the outlines of the Land Expropriation Act, which speaks to whatever land that's expropriated will be used for the benefit of the people. It's not going to be used for the benefit of any individual. So I still say, like, what is AfriForum's solution to that? Do we just leave it? Do we just leave like millions and millions of hectares of land in South Africa in only a few people's hands? It doesn't really make sense, especially because they're not using the land. The land is just there. It's just cool to say that, I stay on a 20,000 hectare farm. If you don't believe me, go on YouTube and search farms for sale. You'll be shocked. People have crazy land. You can see that they'll never even touch pieces of that land. People own mountains. People own rivers. It's crazy.
If President Trump phoned you now, and I mean, things happen, okay? You say that you're very connected. If Donald Trump had to phone you now, if President Trump phoned you now and said to you, look, have I done the right thing here? Should I restore this money to government because I'm worried about what's going to happen to the people who receive HIV treatment through this? And should I choose another tack to put pressure on the government? Would you say yes?
Again, you're trying to disingenuously tie this to a completely separate policy regarding aid. No, you can't just say, well, this is now unique to South Africa when that's a completely separate policy. You're not playing an honest game here, Stephen. You should be ashamed of yourself. I'm sorry.
Ernest, I will decide whether I'm ashamed of myself or not. Thank you. But I'm offering you an opportunity to separate.
I hope your conscience tells you that.
I'm offering you an opportunity to separate the two. That's why I asked the question.
Sure.
So should we separate HIV funding and government pressure from Donald Trump onto our government? That's what I'm asking. That's what I'm offering you, in fact.
All right. Donald Trump is on the phone. What do I tell him? I tell Donald Trump exactly what we tell him in our letter to Mr. Trump. AfriForum's stance is that he should punish the politicians pushing through these destructive policies, not the citizens of South Africa. That has been AfriForum's stance for years, and it is still AfriForum's stance in 2025. That is the simplest way to put it, and the US is completely within its right, morally and practically, to put pressure on the South African politicians that are pushing South Africa to the brink of chaos and lawlessness, and pushing us to the brink of violation of the constitutional right to private property. And that's why AfriForum sees this as such a serious issue.
Yeah, I think that's the conclusion. It's a tricky, contentious issue. A question that I'd love to pose to Ernest from AfriForum is, how do they recommend, or how do they suggest that the United States government punishes our government without punishing the people Because as it stands now, essentially they support Trump to have future funding cuts. However, those funding cuts are gonna, they're directly gonna impact the people. They may not even impact politicians, because we know in South Africa, politicians are detached from the everyday lives of people. So it sounds, as it stands now, it sounds a bit contradictory, because Ernest says that we want America to not punish the people because the people don't make the decisions. Government makes the decisions. But at the same time, Trump is saying he's going to stop funding South Africa. He's not funding politicians. He's funding the people. He's funding, those funding activities have to do with benefiting the people of South Africa. So that's the question that I would ask Ernest, and if he would have a great suggestion as how they can fix that. But other than that, I think it's a very contentious issue. I think it's very layered, very multifaceted. I think it's a conversation we're going to be having for a long time, and I'm going to be here. I'm going to be following it, and I'm not taking sides at the moment. I like the idea of having land expropriated. As I said, I still think it's ridiculous that people own 10,000 hectares. They own pieces of land that they will never even walk on, let alone work on. So I think that particular thing needs to be, visited and dealt with properly. But I get it. People are scared. People are scared of the ANC. People are scared of how the ANC is going to implement policies going forward, how it's been implementing policies. It doesn't have a good track record of implementing policies. I wouldn't look at BEE, it's good on paper. It's like land expropriation. On paper, it sounds good. It sounds great. It sounds like it seeks to, fix injustices. But in the long term, will it actually do that, or will it just benefit, a few connected people? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, I'll be here doing more videos on this type of stuff. I'm really interested in this. Let's see what happens.